Professor Colin Bryson has a fantastic career in education from a number of institutions in the UK, including Nottingham Trent, St Andrews and Stirling, before he joined Newcastle University in 2008 as the Director of the Combined Honours Centre. But he's also here in his capacity as one of the co-founders of the RAISE network, which started as a community of practice between staff and students in regards to all things student engagement in around 2009, around 10 years ago. And what Colin doesn't know is that actually one of my first forays into the world of student engagement was at one of the RAISE conferences a couple of years ago in Manchester. So it's great to have Colin here, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what he's going to do with us over the next hour and a half. So everybody, Professor Colin Bryson.
Well, thank you very kindly. It's always a huge pleasure to come to Ireland. In fact, you know, I'm thinking about emigrating, I think. My daughter's already done that, especially what's going on in the UK at the moment. It's probably the best thing to do, isn't it? But, I mean, what a pleasure too to talk about my very favourite subjects, which are about student engagement and student partnership, which I think is really in a direction that student engagement has gone. And I'm going to maybe talk a bit about why. I think that's a good thing. But first of all, I'm going to talk a little bit about RAISE, because that's something that's been very dear to my heart. That's the first slide. So, RAISE network. When I started out in this, in this domain, I used to be an employment researcher, by the way. I researched on precarious employment in higher education, of which there's a hell of a lot. It seems to have got worse rather than better. But I switched, when I sort of, my learning and teaching focus, just after sort of 2002 or so. And we did some work with students. And the point about that was, what came out of that, we didn't even use the word engagement then in any sort of meaningful way. But it was that I was working in a big business school, that the students weren't engaged, right? They really weren't engaged. And so it was a bit of an issue emerging in the sector. And so a few of us got together, because we kept meeting at conferences, and said, well, why don't we form a body that focuses on this and draws attention to it? So it was about 10 years ago that we really got going. There was 4 of us at the beginning. I think there's now 1,200. It's a very fluid organisation in the fact that membership is free, so we don't really know who our members are. So we sort of count those that sort of are on our JISC mail list, and I suppose the thing is it comes and goes. And part of the thing why it comes and goes, by the way, is this is one of the big challenges of student engagement, is students aren't around for all that long in terms of years, because, and we're very pleased that they do, is they graduate and they move on. But that gives us some challenges too. And I suppose that's one of the things about the challenges in RAISE is that, we've probably got some people on the books who probably aren't looking at the emails anymore because they're off doing something different. That's fine. But it's very much a values-driven collaboration. I'm going to talk a lot about values today because I think that underpins what we do and what we should do. And I think the other thing I know is maybe email isn't the best method of communicating. It doesn't really, all right, you can exchange a few things, can't you, and organise a few things. And if you really want to discuss something, meeting face-to-face is still rather important even in our wonderful, brave, technological world. I haven't quite mastered all the methods that now everybody seems to use. I was at our student staff committee yesterday, and they were saying, well, we're now set up an Instagram account because Facebook is dead. And I was thinking, I was only just getting to grips with Facebook. Damn it. But anyway, meeting face-to-face is important. So we have an annual conference, which I think is a great way to get 200 or 300. There's 300 people in the room this year. And, that's about 100 students were part of that 300. And that really changes the dynamics of gosh, they're so different to the academic conferences I went to 30 years ago, I can tell you, which were pretty dry. I might have to call them pretty dry. I remember people fighting. They actually used to fight with each other physically because they were so hot about their ideas. But I don't think, those of us who work in education and go to educational conferences, they're much friendlier affairs. So anyway, we have these special interest groups, so what I'm suggesting is that, why don't you join? Just look up, Google Raise Network, and you'll find the website, and you'll find instructions there how to join. I think I've got that on the next slide. But you're very welcome to be part of it. It is challenging to communicate, and I think that's one of the things we'll talk about, is reaching the students. I don't want students just to come to events because they've come through the gatekeeper of a staff member. Because that means that they have to be invited, and that's not very inclusive, I don't think. So, but it's still very challenging to reach them. So maybe you have good ideas about that. And I think one of the things about Raise is, I mentioned the thing about, we have student members on our committee. Well, they're different ones than the start because these students have all graduated now. Even the ones doing PhDs have all graduated. They've been through the whole system. But I think what we do get, which is lovely, and this is very the very dynamic part of it, is it brings in lots of new ideas all the time. And I think one of the things about this whole area is we want new ideas, we want different ideas that actually speak to the diversity of higher education. Okay. So, next annual conference is in Lincoln. By the way, because it's the 10th anniversary at the University of Lincoln in the UK of the Student as Producer project, which was led by Mike Neary. And so we thought it was very apposite for Lincoln to host the conference, because that was changing the position of students, something I want to talk about quite a lot. We also have a journal. You're most welcome. It's a very developmental journal. It's for people who, we're very welcoming of papers and ideas and lots of different ways of disseminating things. Not just a dry old academic paper. Videos would be great, blogs, opinion pieces, case studies, and we're very helpful, in terms of the editorial team, will guide people through the process that haven't done it before, and that's students and staff. So these are some of our SIGs. That's how you join the GISC mail. It's got the most impossible address. These slides will be shared with you, but maybe Googling is easier than trying to note down that address. But we also have the website. So, after that introduction to Raise, I think the important way for me to start here is to ask you what your issues are. Because there's no point in me talking and in all the activities we're going to do over the next hour and a half or so, if they're not relevant to you. And I would like to focus on the things that are most relevant. Now, hopefully you aren't going to surprise me hideously and come up with things which I really haven't a clue how to take forward. Though I suspect my 40 years in HE will reasonably equip me to cope with anything, I hope. But I just thought, why don't you have a little discussion around your tables? And if the themes are student engagement and working with students, staff and students working together in partnership, what are the big issues there? So and then we'll try and pull out some, right? And then I'll try and make sure that we address them in the time we have this afternoon. Over to you. Okay, I'm now going to very rudely interrupt because we're going to have more discussion shortly about various things, but I thought that would maybe give us enough to work with some ideas. So what I'd now like to do is I'll work around all the tables and you can give me one of the things that you've been talking about, right? Because otherwise we'll be flattened, I think, by too many. And so, shall I start at the back? That table over there, inside the door. Yes? One idea? One issue?
So I would say one of the biggest issues is that students only look for services and support when they need them. So they only go for that at the last minute, like the night before the exam or something. And at that point, you're kind of doing A&E rather than actually preventing something.
All right. Yeah, well, and we can think about some of the reasons behind that in due course, and maybe try and tackle that. So what you're saying is that's problematic because, yeah, it's almost like you're too late to put on the remedies.
But also, like, you work in the service yourself, like, like, there's certain, like, kind of statistics or things that kind of outline, like, this student will be in trouble at a certain point because they're not attending classes or their class participation is low. So within the first 3 or 4 weeks, their first assignment hasn't been submitted or they haven't attended classes to a certain point. So it's coming. But what can you do? Because they're not looking for it.
Although you might get that wrong.
Well, you might.
But they're usually, there might be some predictors and so on and so forth, but you have to wait for that. We'll come back to maybe solutions to that approach, isn't it? And I'm sure you've got some. Okay, thank you for that one.
Thank you.
Right, table next door.
One of the things we thought was return on investment. In other words, what does a student get out of engaging in forums or being part of committees or engagement groups within the institution?
Yeah.
And we were just talking about it can be difficult to get some student reps to attend meetings or forums, and it would be interesting to find out why. It could be time. You know, it could be due to the fact that actually they don't see the purpose of it, or there's no feedback loop, or they don't feel that their voice is important. But you know, what is their return for actually engaging in?
Yeah, what's in it for them? I mean, what are the motivations to take part, and reward and recognition, which is often quite challenging. We want, you know, some people say, well, pay them, but I'm thinking, oh, well, but if you've got 1,000 people that you need to pay, suddenly you can't afford it anymore, right? And is that the right incentive anyway? Is that not encouraging something that's too transactional? So that's a whole problematic issue in itself. Thank you for that one. Okay, table in front, Em.
One of the things that we discussed was the idea of where you do have genuine interest on both parties, both staff and student parties, to go about partnership in its truest sense.
Yeah.
That can often be something that both parties don't know how to go at. And you know, where in an institution, even within a small grouping of people, how do you facilitate that? How do you move beyond tokenism so that it's true partnership? And what does that look like?
Yeah, that's difficult. You know, we're not all experts on it before we've even started. Yeah, why would we be? Yeah, good point. That table in the middle. We'll just sort of work our way forwards.
Okay. Yeah, so I'm faculty representative, and the issue that I'm having is trying to get course reps and school reps on the ground to feed back issues that are happening. So I'm reaching out, I'm trying my best, but they're not feeding back. It's just there's that like.
This is a big challenge in representation. Is all the communication links, isn't it? And are our structures are they too distant? I mean, we've tried to introduce at Newcastle school reps to bridge the gap between course reps and sabbatical officers. You know, 6 sabbatical officers are where it is, 1,000 course reps, and it's about a sort of democratic deficit that can result, because I'm really challenging about how you structure that and encourage people to feed in. Yeah, good point. I'm sure that our school reps have entirely solved the problem.
It's a follow-on from yourself, where a student frustration might be when the feedback is given, or when you are brought to the table and you give that opinion, that you don't hear anything back, and that things can seem to disappear into the administsphere or the committee merry-go-round, where it's one thing to be asked, but then you need to kind of find out.
Well, indeed, you want to see that your voice makes a difference. Otherwise, what's the point?
So one of the things that we were discussing is the power dynamic in committee meetings, and then we kind of we're discussing that quite a bit. So we're talking about the culture of meetings, whether students are tokenistic being there or whether they're actually actively involved, and then kind of the respect given when people make suggestions. So that was one of the areas we felt was the power dynamic.
Power is the elephant in the room, isn't it? And I think there are ways and means. I mean, funny enough, I was at in my own course, the student staff committee yesterday. One of the ways we try to balance that a little bit is there's 20 students in the room, there's 2 staff. That helps. When it's the other way round, I think it's a pretty tough gig that we give these student reps, because actually people like me are pretty good at ignoring, or ignoring is not the right word, at using verbal sophistry and platitudes to say, oh yes, that's very interesting, let's move on. And we can't, that's an exercise of power in its own right, isn't it? So how do we change that stuff around?
So we spoke about, actually there's a lot of trends already starting to develop, but we talk like participation and students really understanding the definition, and staff, of participation. Does it mean just turning up, or does it mean turning up and meaningfully engaging in the process? Which links it back to training for students, right? That they understand that when they're representing a larger cohort, that they actually use their voice. Also communication is a big thing. That student reps then, the responsibility is with the student reps to go and communicate back and in a sense close the feedback loop if they've engaged. That doesn't always happen.
Well, it's having an effective system of democracy.
Of course, yeah,
then,
on both sides.
Yeah, I think participation to me means, it actually means taking responsibility.
Yeah, yeah.
Rather than airing something. This is a tricky one. Is sometimes we say back to the students, I say as head of department, I say, well, I want you to raise that with that other department, because if I raise it, they'll just ignore me. You've actually got as much power as me to raise it, and actually there's all sorts of good things that would come from that, because they then are taking responsibility and ownership, which partnership has got a lot to do with. Yes, next table. Right, okay, this is good stuff. These are all really important issues.
We had 2 points. First was around how can we make student engagement important to leaders, and women raised the point about that we've to try and move away from key performance indicators towards quality enhancement, but that's difficult because you need to be able to, it's almost a driver because you're trying to measure yourself against maybe different institutions or to see where you're at. And the second point was around student-centred learning, which is something I had spoken about earlier, but to try and to make engagement more powerful for students, to be more individual in how they're taught. But how can you do this in practice? Because we don't have a framework for it, and it's very individual to learners and it's very individual to discipline.
Okay, I think you can create circumstances which improve the chances of that happening. The first one, I think there's some possibilities there, but I'm going to talk about that as being one of the great dangers that can happen. In fact, we call it the appropriation of student engagement sometimes, when it goes up a ladder and morphs into something that wasn't intended at all. Yeah, it's about keeping the values all the way through the structure. Yeah, okay.
Likewise, we had 2. One doesn't happen here, but senior management buy-in and cultural change, the need for cultural change. Yeah, linked. And then the other one was more positively, as how we deliver our programs in higher education is changing, blended learning, distance learning. How do we support those students?
Yeah, because it's, can you do that online and things like this? So you have to do it in different ways.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, last but not least.
Our main one was kind of how, like, we obviously have the students that are engaged and are constantly doing things like this, but how do you engage with the disengaged students and the staff and students that aren't engaged currently? How do you engage with them?
Yeah, apparently disengaged, because we might be engaged to something, but maybe it's not the thing we want them. And when we say we want them, there's all sorts of loaded issues in that too. But it's reaching out to people who we don't seem to be reaching. Okay. That's really important stuff. Okay, these are all, I hope in some ways we're going to address, I don't know if we're not going to solve all these things, because if we could, gosh, we'd have solved them ages ago, wouldn't we? These are challenges that we face. I think there are ways and means, and I'm going to hopefully address some of that, at least a lot of it in the talk. So I want to start a bit, because I suppose I am a professor, I am an academic, and I have done quite a lot of research in this. And so there's some ideas behind that, and I thought I'd share a little bit of that. Maybe because what it does try to do is to develop a common understanding of what is an immensely, oh gosh, confused subject sometimes, I think. Because there's so many meanings. Maybe we should never have used the word engagement, and we should never have used the word partnership, because they are metaphors and things like this for many, many different things. But let me try and capture what some of the literature and some of the research says about that. Briefly, anyway. So, I did this early work with colleagues because I was given a big responsibility for independent learning in a business school with 5,000 students. who were having basically, they thought they were, and I accurately describe it as they were in a teaching factory where it was a means to an end to get a good job at the end. You know, you could survive the 3 years, the 4 years of your degree or your postgraduate degree. And although staff sometimes strive mightily to change that around, it wasn't easy, you know, because that was, I suppose, the motivation for so many people. And so we basically had a lack of engagement. But we tried to explore a lot of the issues behind that, and I'll try and bring them out by looking at it, you know, by following student paths all the way through their degrees. And then I followed that up at Newcastle, I suppose, with other studies, but hopefully then that's more evaluating interventions to try and improve things. And I think one of the dangers is that if you just, at that time particularly, if you just looked at stuff that had student engagement in the title or in the abstract, you didn't get the best ideas. Because this stuff has been around since education started. And so I got some lovely stuff from the schools sector. Because when you're in compulsory education, dare I say you're even more likely to be disengaged, aren't you? Because you're not there by choice. I mean, to some extent it can be very enjoyable, but often teachers are having quite a challenging job trying to teach something that students don't particularly want to engage with or learn. They don't see the relevance of it. But some great work by various people. And there's obviously, it came from all around the world. And the other thing that we did quite quickly in RAISE, it was one of our ambitions from the very start, was to say, let's write a collective book about this and pull these ideas together. It took a few years to get organised. So I wrote a long chapter in there about, you know, conceptualising student engagement, and I think I eventually said, I don't think you can, because it's so many different things. It's a big multi-construct. But maybe we can have some common understandings around some things. But I think the things that the chapters that are most powerful to read in that book are the ones that were in the middle, and they were all written by students. And gosh, they were articulate. Gosh, it was powerful what they said. Because what they bring out is quite often we're obsessed with behavioural engagement. Students should be doing this, shouldn't they? I think that told us how much feelings mattered, what they felt about their educational experience. And that was powerful and is powerful. Right? How can we influence that in constructive and positive ways? And I'm not so sure about the US paradigm, and I know that you have the Irish survey, and it's a heck of a lot better than the NSS, which we use in the UK, which is a satisfaction survey. I mean, right, I can understand, we're not trying to upset people as they go through their educational experience, but does that really tell us what they're learning and what a good educational experience it's been? I don't think so. Your survey is much better at that. But it still has some drawbacks, because it tends to say, you know, how often do you engage usually? Well, this is the NStEP one, I don't quite know how much you've altered it. It's how often do you engage in these virtuous behaviours, which we think are about, you know, educationally purposeful activities. And I'm thinking, well, maybe you engage in slightly different ways, and you're getting a lot out of your education, but we're missing that. And I'm not sure you can measure this at all. If I couldn't even conceptualise it, you certainly can't measure it. Right? So there are some risks in that, but they tell us some interesting information, and that's useful, right? And they can certainly tell us sometimes when we've got some problems. I remember when I went into my job, we had the lowest National Student Service score in the country in our degree, you know, for that type of degree, and the lowest one in the university. And I thought, there are problems here which I've got to sort out, right? Because it was the only way the student had the opportunity to feedback. So they expressed themselves through that route. And we have to remember that too. And I think what you've alluded to, and of course this is a very important thing because of the roles and things that you have, is there's a parallel movement. I've been talking a little bit about individual student engagement, you know, held by that particular student. But the collective model of student engagement is also a huge strand. It's massively important in this room, but it's used in the same way. And I'm thinking, but it's slightly different, though they do link. Right. So this is my notion of students engaging, and this is the nature of engagement to a student. I suppose I come from that background. I see it as it's a big thing. It's not just what they do in the classroom, it's about their whole lives, and that's the holistic part of it. It's socially constructed, which means that it's dynamic. You know, I could try to measure somebody's student engagement on a Monday, and and it might be different on Tuesday because something had happened, right? Some things might be the same, but other things. And I think the other thing is each person experiences it differently and sees it differently, which is a big challenge. And so I think it's inside the person. That's why we can't measure it properly, because we don't know about people's sense of being. We can try and find out a bit about that by having long conversations with them. And maybe that's a good way to start between students and staff. Let's have some dialogue and some conversations. And then we'll maybe start to find out a bit about each other and what motivates us, and what we want to do. But that sense of being is really important. My argument is that without it, we don't learn, and we don't learn in the ways that are important in higher education, which are about transformative learning or powerful learning. The stuff I've got at the bottom there. Because you have to go to a different place, an uncomfortable place, to do that. And unless you're motivated and strongly engaged, you just won't. So there's no point in joining an educational institution and leaving 3 years later, 1 year later, wherever you leave, being exactly the same person who started. Because I think, as an educator, we would have failed you, right? I also recognise that maybe when if you're a mature student and you go, you'll have a lot of firmed ideas already, right? So I'm not expecting you to sort of go, oh my goodness, I'm a completely different person, but you'll be changed in slightly smaller ways. Okay. And I think some of these things at the bottom are what the things that we're looking for in that change, some of these ideas. So the key influences that we found in the research, and we started, by the way, I suppose we were lecturers, Len Hand and I, who did most of this work, and then Christine that I worked with, Christine Hardy later on, we were teachers, and so we were more interested in the classroom, but then we discovered it wasn't just the classroom that mattered. So there's a lovely idea of François Dubé, French sociologist. He talks about students' personal project. Why are they here? Right? What are they trying to do? And they'll have different personal projects. And sometimes people have a very strong personal project and it carries them through, despite the experience being a bit crap, almost. And the fact that maybe they don't get very good teaching, but because they're strongly motivated, they make the most of it themselves and the best of it themselves. But we shouldn't rely on that, right? That's not very fair. And things like interest in the subject matters, because, dare I say, with business schools where I worked, most of them weren't interested in business. They were interested in a good job. That's not the same thing. Whereas, dare I say, if you study archaeology, you probably like archaeology, and that makes life easier all around, doesn't it? But interesting challenges there. The professional subjects and so on, quite often people are not it's not their personal project, it's somebody else's personal project. It could be their parents. Dare I say. Okay, so challenge and workload are important, and this is a nightmare for us as staff, or me as staff particularly, I suppose, because, and those of us who are staff, because everybody's is different. So how do I get that right? Okay, I'm not going to go through all these in fantastic detail. Trust relationships are massive, and they were generally absent in some of the jobs I've had. We didn't even think we didn't think it was our job to do that. And I suddenly realised, later in my career, yes, it is our job. Is to try and create good relationships with people. The communications and discourse won't happen without the trust relationships. The sense of belonging is really important. We must make our students feel welcome, right? Not always sure that we do that. I've been to induction events where they say, oh, you're going to have a really hard time for the next 3 years, but you'll emerge a better person. I'm thinking, that's a sort of school of hard knocks, so I'm not sure that's good. Supportive social networks, that's really good. But then here's an interesting one. The meaningful activities, this sense of ownership that you might develop, self-assurance and self-efficacy, Vincent Tinto and self-efficacy. That's that becoming an independent person and so on. And of course, for students who go in at the age of maybe 17, 18, these are particularly important because it's a life passage. But mature students, in a sense, that can be just as meaningful to them too. Okay? So these are all important. But here's a critique that's emerged about student engagement. It's maybe taken a few years. There's a bit of an arrogant critique where the high-flying researchers give it their attention. They say, oh, this is totally under-theorised because I haven't looked at it yet, and I'm a theoretical expert. And I'm thinking, thank you for that, but that wasn't actually that useful. But I think there is some genuine critique. I've told, it's so huge, it's so messy, there's so many different practices under its banner. It's just huge now across the world. But some dangers. And I did a keynote, I'm not going to say exactly where, but it was in a Greek university. And it was preluded by the dean saying, and we're just about to introduce our new attendance policy, which I expect you all to follow assiduously. Whereupon, of course, I stood up and I said, well, attendance policies are a terrible idea, unless they're predicated, voice from the back there, on the basis of trying to recognise if our students are having a hard time. And it might give us some indications. So we want to maybe bring people in and have a friendly chat if they aren't coming to class, because there could be a problem. There might not be, but there could be a problem. It's quite likely. So let's not beat them with a stick. Let's try and communicate. Right? So we have to remember student agency is really important here. And it's not about us coercing them, because engagement doesn't come from being bullied or being forced to do anything. The other thing I think, and I've alluded to this quite a bit already, is this notion that there's an ideal student and the ideal student behaves in a particular way. I mean, what a load of rubbish that is, let's be honest. And because if we think like that, all the time we're going to think this person's disengaged because they're not behaving in the way we expect them to. Now, the doing student engagement one, and that has arisen because in a lot of UK universities now, and I'm not sure what's happening here, I'm not so expert here, we've got all these student engagement managers and officers. And they tend to say, I'm going to introduce this exciting new activity. And it's like, oh, and then they'll turn around to me, and I used to be editor of the race journal, and they'd say, well, here are the ones that do this, they're the engaged students. And the ones that don't do this, they're the disengaged students. And I'm thinking, you're just doing engagement to people and thinking that what you offer is all, it needs to be offered in 1,000 ways, because there's so many students who will be saying, well, that doesn't actually interest me. Why should I do that? What's the motivation for me to do it? What's the reward? I don't see one that I find intrinsically interesting. Now, there's a deeper critique here from Bruce McFarlane and Mike Tomlinson. And actually at this year's race conference, Bruce and I we had a debate to start with. And so Bruce's position is, and he's just rewritten, or revised, sort of come back to Carl Rogers' ideas from the 60s, freedom to learn, right? So the students should be entirely independent and make their own choices. And he did hark back to the sort of, wasn't it wonderful in the old days when we didn't have any central services and the academic could do what they liked and everything like this, and the personal tutor was the person that gave all the support. And I had to say, well, I'm sorry, Bruce, but I actually was a student in these days, and I've actually been a teacher. It was rubbish then, actually. It was rubbish. It wasn't any better. Don't tell me that. But he does make a good argument in the sense that he's saying, it's a bit worrying here that this is being appropriated by neoliberal forces, and students think they have to. Maybe they have to become a rep, otherwise they won't get a good job afterwards, because only those that do all the extras get the good jobs. And I'm thinking, we don't want students thinking they have to become a rep. We want them to, they need to become reps because they think it's a valuable thing to do, right? And that performativity element is difficult. We work in a world where performativity is on all of us. And I'm going to come back to that in quite a large measure. But it doesn't mean that we can't fight against it and try and shape it and mitigate it. Okay. So, I think the step now for me is to say, right, is this the right slide to do this? Checking my notes. Okay, no, I'm going to pause before I get to that. I'd like more discussion on the tables about, have you seen examples of appropriation of engagement where it's maybe been taken off in the wrong direction? I'm sure you haven't. Surely not. Because, I'm sure all the senior managers you work with are lovely people and totally on board with the values, And I bet there's some senior managers in the room, and they'll be thinking, oh, my staff are really fully on board here, and all this. Now here's the thing, are all the students fully on board, and things like this? Because maybe they've come to higher education expecting it to be something different. So, a bit more discussion, I think, around just thinking about these things which are, could there be some problems for student engagement with some of these ideas, and have you seen any examples of that? Right. But I think there's something important. So the feedback's a little different because I'm going to invite whoever wants to feedback to do so, and I'll maybe take 3 or 4, because this is a slightly more delicate topic, but not but it's an important one, isn't it? Okay. Whoever, any volunteers? Oh, over there.
So we were talking about a good few different issues, but something that we spent a lot of time on was actually kind of, it's true, we talk the topic of pictures, and whenever the universities or colleges or ITs are doing stuff, and they invite students along to get pictures with them, and then that's what goes in publications or newspapers. It's like, look, we actually talk to students, see, look, we've got a photograph of everything, and how it doesn't matter what views that student has or what relevance they were to the particular project at hand. It's a case of lecturers or academic staff or senior management particularly, and the marketing officers particularly, are just like, well, we've ticked that box because we can see that there's students here, and look, these are really engaged students because they came and showed up for a picture. So that's one of the kind of bigger issues we spent quite a bit of time talking about.
No, that's a good one. Thank you for that. I mean, it's sort of, that's why I'm slightly worried about sometimes the word voice, because they might be hearing your voice, but are they listening? And are they acting? And maybe when they just take your picture, they've ticked that box, which was a nice one. That's a good one. Yes.
Hi, this is sort of the same vein of that it's very tokenistic when, like, as a rep, you invite your meeting and you say you get your class consensus, you do your surveys, you show this information and this feedback you're ready to give to management or to the senior management, and then say, so I have a survey done, like, that's great. Yeah, do you want to hear the results? And they're like, not really. So like, it's like, oh, the rep showed up, box ticked, we've built engagement. It's very just like the same thing, like you show up and that's your job done, they don't expect anything more from you. And you say, I want to them, but when they listen, it's not really guaranteed.
Yeah, it's sort of going through the motions, isn't it? It's sort of, they've got some time, in order to sort of do their strategy, which, it's in everybody's strategy now. But then how are they actually enacting that strategy? And what has changed because of what you've said? And they can't show anything there. And then sometimes they show tokenistic things again. Is that, yeah, okay. Right, one more, I think. I mean, I realise there could be 50 more. I'm sorry, I'm not giving everybody the chance.
Yeah, so I suppose kind of the opposite of what was just said there, more so on the student side.
Okay.
So we would find that a lot of our class reps are putting themselves forward to be class rep just for a CV, and then after that they're falling off and actually not being so not going for the right purposes. They're not going to be an active class rep to engage with students' union and engage in structures. It's just for a CV because they know that's what employers look for, and that then leads so they just do it. They get the position and then they just fall off and disengage. So that's kind of becomes a real barrier because especially for students' union, then we depend on our class reps to hold the officers to account, and if they're not showing up to engage in that kind of platform as well, things kind of go astray.
Yeah, and actually one way of addressing that, I suppose, but that feels like performativity, is to say, well, if you haven't attended 80% of the meetings, we won't give you your accreditation. And then you're starting to feel like more like the police.
Yeah.
And, so is that helping? But I think one of the things is I recognise that many of the students I've worked with, their original motivation for applying for something was something like the CV, but then once they get involved, it changes. And I suppose that's our goal, isn't it? Is once we draw them in and start to have the conversations, and maybe they see that they're actually doing something important that makes a difference, and of course that can be undermined by all the other things that we talked about, then they might get drawn in. That's what we hope. And I think it does happen. It probably happened with a lot of the people here, because maybe you have to think about what was your original motivation for applying. Because it would certainly be true to maybe apply to me when I became a rep back in 1975 or whatever it was. Right, okay. Thank you. That's really, and I know there will be many other similar types of conversations held. And I think this is important stuff, isn't it? Is actually just thinking and reflecting about what we do. and we can get caught up in this. So, I'm now going to sort of switch up a bit in terms of, so how do we offer authentic engagement? Maybe not all these types. How do we ensure we're inclusive? Because that's really hard. And I think we have to appreciate the nature of engagement, and I think the people who do student engagement just don't. But maybe when you've got a busy job, it's all very well for me to say that, but you know, I'm actually paid to do research and things like this, and to read and things, and go to conferences and so on. So I've got a massive advantage over somebody who's never allowed to do that, and never gets the funding to do that. And they don't get the chance to think outside the box so much. And recognising as well that, well, you know, I am the head of department, I've got my KPIs this year. And it's, you know, it's because we only got 89% in this, you know, in this thing in the NSS, so therefore we're failing. And so therefore you've got to address that. Maybe it was actually a bit lower than, when it comes to assessment and feedback, it's a heck of a lot lower than 89%. But why would we expect anybody to be satisfied with assessment? I'm not sure. Issues. But, so how do we take a strategic approach? So this is this different approach, of which I think many of you are well aware of. So this idea, a different positioning of student altogether, under a number of headings and banners, but all have the same value set behind them, I think. So instead of thinking that the knowledge resides in the staff, and all the expertise is in the staff, and students come here to get enough of that transmitted to them to pass their degrees, so that they can go on to get the good jobs and the graduate premium. That's all very transactional, isn't it? What about them being co-producers of knowledge, and they are? Co-creation, so therefore let's co-design out things together, rather than leave it to the expert teacher or administrator to do. Co-learning, because I learn quite a lot too from working, you know, in the classroom, working outside the classroom and so on. That's been a wonderful journey. And then working together as partners, that's one way of describing it. Although sometimes we sort of think, oh, is that a bit of an extreme term? Are we really partners? And actually, I got we wrote a reflective article, a group of us, a graduate, an existing student, in fact 2 graduates, an existing student, and a young colleague of mine and myself. And the existing student, she's chair of the SSE, by Jove, she relayed into us. You know, I'm invited to these meetings, but do they really listen to what I'm saying? I was quite hurt, actually, because I was thinking, but I do. But here's a bit of a tricky issue for me in my department. We've made so many changes that students have asked for. It's now that we're left with the really stinky, hard things to change, which is beyond my power, and although I work at it. And I think she doesn't see the early years when we made a lot of changes, because we made all the ones that were easier to change at the beginning. But it doesn't mean that's no excuse. And I'm well aware that we need to work harder, and that was a bit of a salutary lesson about some of the things we do appearing to be tokenistic, although not intended to, right? So, you know, however much you try. But then there's the notion of co-governance as well, which actually quite a lot of people in the field don't talk about. They're not talking about co-governance in an institution, they're simply talking about teaching and learning. But I think the radicals among us say, let's go further. So it's not a new idea. You know, at least a century old, probably centuries old. You can actually go back to some of the Greek ideas and so on. But I think some good roots of it lie in the ideas of critical and radical pedagogy, a different way of perceiving who are learners and who are teachers. And maybe, you know, in critical pedagogy, the learner and teacher doesn't really exist, as they coexist, and they're synonymous. But it certainly counters the neoliberal position, right? Because many of us in HE are heartily sick of getting that shoved down our throats. You know, we're going through a general election at the moment, and some very interesting policy differences between the parties. But most people outside HE have just bought this idea that higher education is a private good and just for individuals. You know, and many of us don't believe that. And I think there's some great ideas there. Manifesto for Partnership, if you haven't read that, was the UK NUS approach to the bringing in of the higher fees. It's a great document. It's slightly naive in some ways, because the naivety is it assumes that the academic staff have the power, that all we need to share. We don't actually have that much power. It resides in another layer of people above us. Okay. So the virtues of partnership, and this is I suppose the ideological. And there's old Paolo Freire there, great book. Great ideas. Not easy to introduce all his ideas all at once, but some inspirational things in there. I think this is all about being more ethical, it's about being more democratic, it's about being that higher education should be an exemplar and make this contribution to society. Isn't it interesting that I'm pleased to see that NStEP's principles absolutely echo this stuff? Because I think if we start with these sort of values, we're going in a good direction. And higher education isn't a place where we toughen people up with the hard knocks of outside life and we sort of get used to them being unfair. We want our students to graduate saying, we're going to get rid of unfairness because we've experienced a better place, maybe in the world of higher education, rather than the rubbish that we have to put up with in many institutions, right? So that's what we aspire to. So this is an interesting definition. This is a great book about it. It's quite evangelical because they're trying to persuade, I suppose, mainly faculty, as the American term would be for staff, but also students, I suspect. And they've marshalled together a whole lot of arguments, and it's really nicely written. Lots of good stuff in there. But I like this is because quite often the immediate critique is, well, students and staff, it's the lecturer and the student, they're different. The professor's the world authority with all this expertise on their subject. How can the students, dare to challenge that or suggest that? And I'm thinking, well, partnership, though, is we recognise and respect each other, and we say our expertises are different. I have very little expertise about my students, really. I have to come to get to know them first. But they bring so many good things into the room. And so many of the wonderful changes that we've made in the degree and how we operate in much better ways and in much more proactive ways. So, for example, students that are having difficulties, we recognise that who the person they really want to share that with, and they're much more likely to, is another student. So we have a lot of peer support systems because they're much more open up to them quickly and at the beginning, rather than coming to this old guy in an office that they don't really want to visit, right? However approachable I try and make myself. So I think that's quite important. But I love Tanya Lubitz-Rocca. She's basically just finished her PhD at Edinburgh University, and she's looked at a whole lot of schemes in Scotland where they did co-creation together. And this was one of the students in one of these projects, and I'm thinking, oh, maybe that's something to aspire to, isn't it? When you're working together and people forget all that, right? People don't do that often with me because I'm still the oldest person in the room. Can't help that. Okay. So the ethos of partnership. So again, from the same book, I like these principles of respect, mutual respect. There's all mutuality running through this. I'm not sure I like the word reciprocity because there's a little bit transactionalism to it. I prefer mutuality. Right? I always remember doing reciprocal things with people where if I do this for you, will you do that for me? I'm quite sure that's the right ethos. But responsibility's massive here. We've got to share responsibility. And that's maybe where we're going to get some student resistance. More of that later. Because maybe they're thinking, do I want that? Or why would I want that? And I think the NStEP principles which we've got on the table and so on really develop these, because that's 10 principles rather than 3, but they're linked into all these ideas, aren't they? And I think one of the things is, without addressing all of them to some degree, we start to, maybe we're being too pragmatic and we're losing something important. But, and I'm going to get to that in a minute. So this is what some earlier research I did, in Newcastle, working with our students who have experienced some degree of partnership, not maybe as big a degree as we'd like. So the participation bit, it's what's key is you have to think, I'm not just doing this for some ritualistic way. It really is valued and it's of genuine worth. So whatever we co-produce together has to mean something, right? And that could be a new activity or something like this that we do, a new practice, but it's just something that changes something, that makes you feel that you've changed something. So co-ownership, all these things. The power, well, it's never completely got rid of. I think there's ways and means. And I recommend looking at Kathy Boval's work. Kathy's a colleague of mine. She works at Edinburgh University. She's done lots of really great practical stuff on. She often says, the keynote at Ray's, and it was something really scary. She said, it's the opening 5 minutes of when you work with people about how you set the tone. And I'm thinking, God, I get that wrong so many times. But hopefully you can recover from that. But I recognise that all the time we've got to be mindful of the impact of how we're doing things on others. And sometimes even setting the furniture up the wrong way can ruin the ambience in the room. This is a good start. Although, here's me saying that, of course I'm in the position of power here because I've got the lectern. I'm talking at you, So I've got to remember that too. So all these good things. And I think the thing is that when you experience them and they get reinforced, and I don't think you can do this, you can't just do one thing, you've got to do quite a few things. And that's my most recent research is actually saying this takes a while to develop and you've maybe got to experience it in multiple forums. And just one staff member doing one thing is unlikely to be transformative to somebody's higher education experience, if I'm being completely honest. And sometimes we make too much of that. But maybe they're good examples to start with, right? But what I'd like, now this is the main task for the afternoon, a bit more time, is I'd like you to, drawing on the NStEP principles, did I make a slide of it? I probably didn't. Oh yeah, I did. Sometimes I do prepare things. So, if we're thinking about these ideas and things in there, these principles, one is, I think there are two things. One is, why are they so worthwhile? Why are they why is that being included? Why does that really matter? Right? And I want you to show that because that's included, there's going to be real, authentic benefits, right? So, benefits. But then, the other part of it, and we have to be just as honest about that, is, well, what are the challenges and barriers that are maybe going to hinder us in really realising these benefits? Because if we don't recognise what they are, we aren't going to get very far. And I'm sure that some of you in your work already have come across these in large measure and are thinking, oh, well, how do we deal with that? Well, I mean, maybe you already have some solutions, okay? And so I suppose they can both come from staff and they can come from students. And when I say staff, it's maybe not, in a sense, it's what the staff perceive as well, and the context and things that we all work in, right, and the situation that we're in. And I think because this is quite a big task, I'm going to participate in a couple of these. So this is the nitty-gritty. This is the really sharp stuff that we have to deal with if we're going to try and progress this agenda. So I think it's, I'm not going to ask for feedback at this point because I think we could spend another hour at least on that, and then I'll have overrun my time schedule completely. So I'm going to grab some from the literature, and you have to see if they resonate, or from the research and things, and see if they resonate with yours. You might be thinking, oh, well, maybe there's a few that we can think of that haven't maybe been very much aired yet. But okay, so let's take that one forward. So, here's some challenges and barriers that have emerged from looking at people attempting to do this, and maybe asking the staff and students involved. So getting it off the ground is hard, right? Mainly because it's different from how we did things before, and it's always difficult to change things. So it takes more time, and we've got to acknowledge that. I'm doing a curriculum review in my degree at the moment that we could probably have achieved within about 4 or 5 weeks if the staff had done it. It's taken already 2 years, right? Partly, funny enough, I was meeting with the new group yesterday because they're a new group of student representatives this year, and they're going to take over from where the others left off, and it might now change direction again. Well, that's fine, because there's no point in me designing the degree for people who've already left, right? But it does take more time. Gatekeepers, people who get in the way, these heads of department, these sort of people. And quite often, looking at it, quite often quality assurance people are blamed as being the gatekeepers and being got to, how did you ever get this past the quality people? And I think, well, actually, they're remarkably receptive to good ideas. Why not just ask? And so I write now things like, to be determined, with the students when we start the module. And my quality people say, what a great way of doing it, And we do want to check that something good emerged from it and so on. But, I think actually confidence is a massive issue. Do we have the confidence to do it? Because we have to be quite brave. And I think you're here in the room because you're already quite brave. You wouldn't be doing the things that you're doing if you weren't. But for many of our colleagues and students out there, we're asking, quite a lot of them and recognise that. And because they're all sorts of, they come from different things. How radical does it need to be? I think because there's a big debate in the literature of, if you don't go for really big, powerful stuff, what's the point? But the trouble is that's much harder, and you could fall on your face. And the thing is, you've got to take people with you. So something in the middle. I think the thing is, the danger of only doing something quite insipid, if I call it that, is that people will think it's tokenistic and it's just trying to tick a box. So it's got to change something, right? But I think always the advice is we start small. But anyway, challenge in state school. Sharing responsibility is a toughie, right? And I've had many students say to me, why are you doing this to me? Especially, I'm final year, I want to concentrate on other things. I need to get a good degree here. I don't want this extra responsibility, please. This is stuff that I do inside the curriculum, so they really have no choice. But I say, you don't have to participate very much in this if you don't want to, but please don't hinder the other students who do want to, right? And I hope that you might value this in some senses. But, but of course for extracurricular stuff, hopefully they've got a choice, and that leads to another one. And vulnerability and risk, and there's a lot of risks. So, some risks. And it all, I think one of the things is, when you talk to different people about this, they all come up with slightly different things about how it affects them and how they see it. Power gaps, we've talked about quite a lot. Scholarly credibility. One thing I've had is, why are you asking us to co-design the assessment with you? Don't you know how to do that? And aren't you paid to do that? And I'm thinking, well, I am, but I think we'll be much, the point is, I'm paid in a sense to enable your education, and so it's designed to benefit you, and in the sense that you have to make these arguments. But that's why we have to build up some trust and things in the first place. And then coping with feedback. Maybe on things that we try here, we don't always get the best feedback. So then immediately in a performative world, we say, well, let's give that up. But we have to be persistent here and encourage our convictions. Inclusivity, this is a whopping challenge. And I have to say, that's been, the early work wasn't very inclusive. And I acknowledge that. I'll hold both hands up to say, I worked with the students who were willing to work with me. They were the ones that had the most social capital, and they gained more. And there might have been some impact, was a good impact on the other students, but it wasn't nearly as powerful as the ones who were directly involved. So now we really try much harder to avoid selection, because selecting people to work with you means that you're sort of saying, oh, who's going to be good at this? That's maybe not the right criteria. Right? That's deeply problematic. In my mind, when you say, oh, you'll be a great rep, but you would actually benefit far more from being a rep. Which one? So you don't choose other reps though, because they're elected. That's better. But maybe that comes with baggage too. Changing the role of student representation. Well, there is a tension here because, right, I've had a long trade union background, and I have to say my relationships with management, the owners and things like this, it's a little bit of a Marxist error, were adversarial because our interests are different. I think the interests between educators and students are not different, but we can't not recognise the right of students to say we don't agree, student reps to say we don't agree. And we are representing the students, we've consulted them and they don't want to do this, or we want to do something different. And that has to exist in tension with the mutuality side. Right? It's a bit like being a trade union rep in a cooperative. If that means anything to people. It's not that we've had many cooperatives, since about the 1970s, but there are a few around the world and things like this, and there's some interesting tensions. Okay. So the benefits, returning to that quickly, is, and this comes from that book again, actually partnership, they show, oh, surprise, surprise, does enhance engagement. Because it motivates people, the learning process, the sense of responsibility, the recognition and things that come through it. What's nice about that is actually getting to know each other as well, and actually students saying, I can see this issue now from the staff perspective, and staff saying, I can see this issue from the student perspective, then they're much more likely to develop a better solution, a better way forward. So that's one area. Then what we might call them metacognitive awareness. By that I mean deeper thinking, just by reflecting on things, a deeper sense of understanding, which is actually rather a key graduate attribute and a key feature for all in education. Right? And that applies to people that might have been in it for 40 years as well. But then, we had a little discussion at the table I was at about this, it actually improves what goes on, because we do it better. Because we're discussing it and agreeing a good way forward. So that's rather important too. So lots of stuff in the literature about that. And I'm sure you came up with some excellent ones there. Here's some feedback though. I talked about for feedback in the performance at World from one of the students I work with, Sam. And he wrote about it in a book. Now look at that first sentence, the first couple of sentences. If somebody had come in and asked him at the wrong moment, they would have said, oh right, you better come off this module, right? God, this must be terrible, man. What does this guy not know what he's doing? The module leader, the teacher? But because I did leave them, rather pushed him in at the deep end, with support, but he just didn't understand what it was about. He was studying business and another subject, and he just said, I can't understand why we're doing this. And it doesn't make any sense to me. But then it did. And he was then able to take it out and so on. So that's sometimes, that's dangerous feedback in some ways, isn't it? Although I like the latter stuff. But he was honest about the former stuff. So culture change. Because I think something that's very important here, and that's where I am with maybe that's my Marxist roots, and the ideology, is it's not just about an individual student gaining benefit. It's about the whole student body and the whole system. So we must remember that. Actually, I think so many people in this room are strongly into the collective. You're representing things, and the student unions, that's what you do, and so you totally have you're into that. But for some people, they sort of say, I want to just sort of see on the what are the graduate attribute gains for individuals, and I'm thinking, well, there are some. But we want it to be for all students. And I think the thing is that links into the citizenship stuff in the community. And something again that I think is quite important, and maybe not talked about much in literature. When we talk about students and staff working in partnership, a lot of it is students and students working in partnership in much more profound ways than they previously done. And maybe that's much more likely to be inclusive and involve all students. Because unfortunately, and that won't change, there's a heck of a lot more students and staff. And I can't, however much I want to, when I'm in a big class of 150 students or something like this, really get to know all 150. But I hope that they get to know each other, and that I create the culture and things like this where things can be constructed and move forward. So relational stuff is massive. It's so big in this. I think the other thing to say is it does make things more fun to do. It's not, this is not some really difficult, punishing thing we're going to do to ourselves and say, oh God, we're really going to have to get through this. This is tough. This has been, since I've embraced this in my own practice and so on, I've loved going into work. I'm retiring this year, and I don't know quite. I'm going to try and carry on in various ways because I'm going to miss this so much. This has been exhilarating. It's just been a roller coaster ride. Because the other thing about it is a bit unpredictable. And that's also challenging in our modern world. We don't seem to like unpredictable things. But because you don't know what's going to emerge from things. But all I can say is, it's always been something good. Even when the project has been a bit of a failure, we've all learned quite a bit from that, and we know that next time we do it. And what we made sure was that by the project failing, nobody got hurt, and it didn't affect anybody's grades or progression or being ability to remain and finish their degree or whatever it would be. Right? But I think it's not a safe space, as some people pretend it is, where we can go, oh, you're all protected, just come in and we'll all talk about this in nice, cozy ways. It's a brave space. It's tough. But I commend you to do it. So a strategic approach, very quickly, final slide. I'm not going to go into massive issues about that. You can read about that if you're particularly excited. But I think selective is dangerous because that's only involving a few students. And the thing is, when we give, when students have roles, for example, extracurricular stuff, even though I might be able to create, so I have a degree with 600 students, I might be able to create 600 extracurricular roles. We have about 100. And that's been quite hard to create for a degree of 600. But if I did, I know that not everybody would take part. So I've tried to go for a universal mode because that's what we do it in the curriculum, and they all take part. Or they take part as much as they wish to. So that's that universal. But the collective, fits into that too. And so scaling up, I think we should maybe start with what I'll call project-based partnership. There's a lot of that around. Role-based partnership, that's rebels, that's mentors, that's peer supporters, peer assistant study support. These things are all great. But we want to have some whole class as well. And I think different people will get different things from, we talked about the diversity there. They will gain in different ways from these different things, but they need to have some choices there. I'm a big fan, this is the latest thing I coined, let's go for the whole cohort approach. So everybody gets to experience partnership in various ways throughout their, at points, can't make it comprehensive because it's challenging. And by the way, Sam would not wanted all his modules to be like that, otherwise the stress would have flattened it, right? Because you can't, not all your education can be, oh right, wow, this is really deep thinking and challenging me, right? Because, not that tough. So, on that note, I'm going to finish my remarks, but I don't know how long we've got, no time at all, almost, for discussion. But you've got my email address. I love people coming and talking to me, and I'll be over in Ireland, I'm sure, at some point again, and things like this. Invite me, guys. And let's continue that conversation. It's just, we're just starting off on a fantastic journey. Thank you.